My name is Ben, short for Benjamin Timothy Haggard, and Shannon and I tied the knot 7 years ago. Despite my best efforts, there's been this nagging feeling of discontent in our relationship persisting for about 6 weeks now. The strain between Shannon and me has escalated, particularly in recent days, and I can't help but think her sister, Nita, is somehow involved. This unease was compounded when I received an unexpected photo. At the time, I was working outside the city on a particularly challenging project. The main refrigeration unit at Purdue University had a critical issue, and despite our team's efforts, we couldn't rectify it. As an engineer at the well-regarded Fraser HVAC company, I was tasked with these kinds of emergencies. It was my turn to be on duty, so I embarked on a 4-hour trip to West Lafayette, staying there from Tuesday until Thursday. We finally cracked the problem late in the evening. Drained, I grabbed dinner on the university grounds before heading to my hotel around 10 p.m. I messaged Shannon, letting her know I was turning in and that we'd continue testing the system the next morning. I also mentioned our plans for dinner on Friday. After a refreshing shower and settling in with entertainment and sports programming network in the background, I received a message from my colleague Roland at Fraser. His message, laced with an apology, included a photo taken that same evening at Casadel. Roland suggested I call him if I wanted to discuss it further. The photo he sent was jarring. It showed a couple at a restaurant, intimately leaning into each other, hands intertwined, their gazes locked. To my shock, it was Shannon and Eric Chesterton, a colleague from the Ohio State University Library. I'd always found Eric a bit odd and never warmed up to him, but the thought of him being involved with my wife never crossed my mind. Our relationship had been going through a rough patch, but the idea of Shannon betraying me with someone else, let alone Eric, was something I hadn't considered until now. The revelation left me reeling, struggling to make sense of this unexpected turn in our marriage. Facing the harsh reality of my wife with another man was something I couldn't have fathomed. Resolving not to let my anger simmer unaddressed, I turned off the TV and reached out to Roland, apologizing for intruding on his Thursday evening. Taking a moment to collect my thoughts, I began discussing the photo he had sent me. Roland recounted the evening. He and Emily had finished their early dinner and noticed Shannon across the restaurant. Emily had recognized her first. Curious, they watched from afar, with Roland capturing the scene in photos. Thankfully, there weren't any overt displays of affection like kissing, just deep conversation, exactly as depicted in the photo. Roland's voice carried a hint of regret as he explained the situation to me. He was genuinely sorry for having to share such news. I asked if Shannon and the man had left together or where they might have gone. Roland recounted that after some time in their car in the parking lot, Shannon and the man never appeared, so he and Emily decided to leave. He regretted not waiting longer, noting that Shannon and her companion had just received their drinks and hadn't started eating, indicating a longer wait was ahead. A heavy silence fell between us, both unsure of what to say next. Finally, Roland broke the silence, expressing his understanding and sharing that Emily had sent her warm regards. She was upset with Shannon, and he shared those feelings. I hadn't fully processed everything yet, but I anticipated a wave of fury to hit me soon. Inquiring about the Purdue job, I asked Roland when I could return home. He informed me that the final testing was scheduled for the next morning, after which I'd embark on the 4-hour journey back. This time would give me a chance to calm down and remind myself not to act impulsively. Roland, knowing me well, was aware that I wouldn't resort to violence against Shannon. He understood that perfectly and expressed his support, along with his friend Emily's. In the midst of our conversation, Roland mentioned that he and Emily had been discussing something, but it seemed too early to broach the subject. He kindly offered, "If you ever need a place to stay overnight, we have a guest room just for you." I expressed my sincere gratitude, telling Roland, "Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm not sure about my next steps yet, but I'll definitely consider your offer." After a few more moments of quiet conversation, we ended the chat. I turned off the light, lay down, and soon drifted off to sleep. I couldn't help but think, no marriage is perfect, right? Despite our issues, I genuinely loved Shannon and had strived to make her happy throughout our 7 years of marriage, including 3 years of dating. Of the common marital issues, money and intimacy often topped the list. Fortunately, Shannon and I didn't face problems in these areas. We were both prudent with our finances, and our intimate connection remained as strong as it was in the early days of our relationship, though it had become more routine. However, our problem wasn't related to money or closeness but involved Nita, Shannon's older sister, who was about 4 years our senior. Her husband, Alex, a lawyer with a superior attitude, thankfully wasn't around as often. Shannon always admired Nita, who was a frequent guest in our home, often giving unsolicited advice on how we should live. From suggesting reorganizing our kitchen to criticizing my preference for a gas grill, and even making derogatory remarks about our furniture, Nita's presence and opinions were a constant source of irritation. The most frustrating aspect, which I'll spare you the long list of other grievances, was how Nita belittled me behind my back. In my presence, she was overly kind, showering me with praise for being nice and caring to Shannon and helping around the house. But the stark contrast in her behavior when I wasn't around left a sour taste, adding to the complexities of our marital challenges. Navigating the complexities of marriage, my wife Shannon and I often found ourselves at odds over her sister, Nita. I remember one particular instance that left a lasting impression. I had returned from a jog and quietly entered through the back door, only to overhear Nita speaking to Shannon in the kitchen. Nita, often critical of me, expressed her affection for Shannon but openly questioned my compatibility with her. She compared me unfavorably to Shannon's past boyfriends, Christopher and Tom, and despite my higher education, she couldn't fathom why I chose to work with my hands. Her suggestion that Shannon could have done better was hard to swallow, especially since we had been married for nearly 2 years by then. Nita's reminiscing about Shannon's past relationships was frustrating, and it was even more disheartening when she questioned our plans to have children. Moments later, she approached me with a facade of warmth, praising me as a wonderful husband, a stark contrast to her earlier comments. This duplicity was not new. Shannon and I had clashed over Nita's behavior numerous times. While Shannon tried to downplay it, claiming Nita wasn't that bad and actually liked me, I found it hard to accept. The tension escalated when Nita insinuated that we shouldn't have children. Overwhelmed by anger and disappointment, I paced our bedroom, feeling on the edge. Despite Shannon's attempts to pacify the situation, explaining that Nita was merely venting, the quarrel spiraled into one of the worst we had ever had. Unable to contain my frustration, I lashed out with harsh words before storming out of the house. I spent 6 hours seeking solace with my friend Raphael, the bartender at Bob's restaurant, mostly sitting in silence trying to clear my head. When I finally returned home at midnight, I found Shannon asleep, turning away from me. The atmosphere was still tense, and our communication was reduced to a mere exchange of good nights, signaling the deepening rift in our relationship. After that strained night, our interactions were reduced to brief morning greetings and a simple request for more coffee. In the following days, things between Shannon and me began to warm up slightly, but the issue remained unresolved. It was clear Shannon cared for me, yet her reluctance to defend me against her sister's humiliating remarks was baffling. My strategy became avoidance, making excuses to not be home when Nita visited and trying to limit any conversation about her with Shannon. The weeks leading up to my work trip to West Lafayette were especially tense. Nita seemed to be around our house more often, engaged in important kitchen conversations with Shannon. This, or perhaps another reason, led to Shannon becoming colder and more distant towards me. She realized it wasn't worth bringing up her sister in my presence, leaving me in the dark about what was going on with Nita. Despite this, Shannon's distance from me grew. Our communication remained polite, but politeness is not what one seeks in a marriage. Shannon became cautious around me, and our closeness noticeably decreased. For several weeks, our interactions were limited to routine hugs amidst an odd atmosphere. Approaching her became a challenge, and I felt on the brink of giving up. Even our private relationship turned routine, with only a few encounters over the past month. Though not great at deep conversations, I did try to reach out. I asked Shannon if something was bothering her, if we needed to have a serious talk. I wanted to address our issues, but she brushed them off, citing work changes and minor issues with Nita as her only concerns. Her response was a forced smile and a quick peck on the cheek. That was all I got. This pattern continued for quite a while, leading me to seek advice from Aunt Gwen. Aunt Gwen, my mother's younger sister, had been a significant figure in my life, especially after my father passed away and my mother fell ill. Although she now living in Seattle, Aunt Gwen and I often communicated over the phone. She was someone who could potentially shed light on Shannon's behavior. After the incident at Purdue and receiving the photo from Roland, I decided it was time to call her. I resolved to push aside my confusion and focus on the task at hand. My primary objective that Friday morning was to test the system's capabilities at Purdue, ensuring it could handle the load efficiently. By early afternoon, all necessary checks were completed, and as a gesture of appreciation, the Purdue team invited me to a quick lunch. After that, I embarked on the 200-mile journey home. During the drive, my mind was a whirlwind of questions. Had Shannon and this man already been intimate, or was it merely a possibility? Did I contribute to this situation somehow? Were Shannon's feelings for him genuine or just a fleeting attraction? Could I muster the strength to forgive? Or was our marriage irreparable? And what about Nita's role in this? Did she influence Shannon's actions? Approaching Columbus amid the chaos of Friday traffic, I still had no clear answers. Not ready to face Shannon at home, I contemplated Roland's offer but ultimately opted for a modest room at Motel 6. After a meal of steak and beer at Outback, I spent another night alone, sending Shannon a simple, unaffectionate message to let her know I was safe and would be home tomorrow. Her reply was a standard "Okay honey, I miss you." Around 9:30 p.m., I drove slowly past our house, scanning for unfamiliar cars. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and the house was dark except for the light in our bedroom. Disheartened, I returned to Motel 6. When I finally went back to our house the next day, there was no urgency in my steps. A sense of emptiness and indifference washed over me. Earlier feelings of anger and vindictiveness had given way to a longing for resolution. I needed to uncover the truth and understand the consequences of everything that had transpired. In the midst of this ordeal, I was determined to understand everything and confront Shannon face to face. Her absence and the eerie silence of the house only heightened my emotional turmoil. Entering through the side door, I headed upstairs to freshen up and organize my belongings. Then, descending to the kitchen to make a sandwich, my eyes were drawn to the front door, where a large, seemingly untouched suitcase stood. The weight of it suggested it was full. Time seemed to blur as I fixated on it, lost in thought. The silence was broken by Shannon's soft greeting as she entered through the side door. "Hello, baby," with a half-smile that felt more obligatory than genuine. She embraced me, but it was more reminiscent of a grandmother's hug than a passionate reunion after a week apart. I couldn't tear my gaze from her, not wanting to raise my voice or cause a scene, just seeking understanding. She guided me back to the kitchen, holding my hand, and we sat across from each other at the table. She asked if I was tired, if I had eaten, and offered to cook lunch, but I reassured her that I was fine, focusing intently on her face. Leaning in, Shannon expressed the need to talk, apologizing and asking for my patience. She requested that I stay calm and hear her out before reacting. I nodded silently, eager for resolution. To my surprise, she began talking about her sister, Nita. Anger surged within me, and I couldn't help but ask, "What does this rude woman have to do with it?" Shannon's face filled with panic as she pleaded for me to listen. I realized my fists were clenched, and I was holding my breath. Rising from my seat, pacing the kitchen, then settling back down, I took a deep breath, striving for composure state universitaire. Eventually, I said, "Okay, go ahead." I was ready to listen, to finally understand the full story, and to find out how Nita was involved in the unfolding drama of our relationship. As Shannon prepared to explain, I reassured her of my commitment to listen. I braced myself, wondering how the conversation would unfold with Nita at its center. After a cautious glance my way, Shannon started to speak. She had been spending a significant amount of time with Nita recently, which was impacting her and creating tension between us. She revealed that things had deteriorated between Nita and her husband, Alex. About a month ago, Nita had caught Alex in a compromising position with one of his assistants on their office table, a scene Shannon had unfortunately witnessed. This had been a profoundly challenging time for Nita, who was dealing with deep heartache and anger. Alex had been continuously apologizing, expressing a wish to reconcile, and even suggesting counseling to salvage their relationship. However, the situation escalated on Tuesday when a depressed Nita asked Alex to leave, expressing her wish for a divorce. This led to an altercation where Nita ended up in the hospital with a concussion. Hearing this, my own marital issues momentarily took a back seat. Expressing my sympathy, I said, "I'm sorry, Shannon. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." Shannon, appearing touched, thanked me and acknowledged my dislike for Nita, appreciating my understanding. Then she continued with what she termed the toughest part. Nita would be discharged from the hospital on Monday but had nowhere to go. With Alex refusing to leave their home and acting hostile, Shannon wanted to offer our guest room to Nita. She explained that Nita would likely need to take sick leave and work part-time for a few weeks. Shannon wanted to be close to her sister and take care of her during this difficult time. Rushing through her explanation, Shannon acknowledged my feelings towards Nita. "I know you don't like her, and you don't want to be around her, but she has no one else," she said, making a plea for understanding and support in a situation that was evidently complex and fraught with emotional challenges. Faced with Shannon's plea, I found myself softening. Despite my reservations about Nita, Shannon's desperation was clear. "You're right. She's not someone I enjoy being around, but that doesn't matter now. Of course, she can stay with us," I said. Shannon's response was immediate and jubilant. She circled the table, sat on my lap, and wrapped her arms around me. Her eyes sparkled with pure joy as she thanked me, her lips meeting mine in a gentle, reassuring kiss. She vowed to protect me, to ensure Nita wouldn't belittle me again. Her happiness was infectious, and I found myself embracing her tightly, overcome with emotion. After a moment, I gently moved her to a nearby chair and went to pour myself a glass of water. The air was thick with anticipation. "Okay, Shannon, can we just finish this conversation? Let's get this over with, whatever it is," I urged. She looked at me, confusion etched on her face. I couldn't hold back my disappointment any longer. "You can't even be honest with me," I said. Her expression was one of genuine bewilderment. "What do you mean? What is the rest?" she asked. Disappointed, I picked up my phone, scrolled through the messages, and found the photo Roland had sent. I showed it to her, saying, "This, Shannon. You and this man." The revelation left her speechless, and I was momentarily puzzled by the suitcase at the front door. Before I could question it, Shannon explained, "Oh, Ben, this is incredibly sad. Carrie, his wife, has a recurrence of breast cancer, and they have 2-year-old twins caught up in it. He's terrified, and my heart goes out to them." I stared at her, suddenly understanding the context of the photo where she was with another man. "Yes, we had dinner. He really needed someone to talk to. Carrie's prognosis is uncertain right now," she said, holding my gaze, conveying a depth of compassion and concern that I hadn't fully appreciated before. As I stood there, grappling with the image in the photo, Shannon's reaction caught me off guard. "Did you really think that was a romantic dinner?" she asked, a mix of disbelief and sadness in her voice. "That's how it looks, right?" I admitted, struggling to keep my voice steady. I explained that Roland and Emily Bruton, my colleagues, had thought the same and were even prepared to meet her in person to discuss it. Before I could react further, Shannon embraced me tightly. "Benjamin Timothy Haggard, you're the only man I've loved or even considered in the last 7 years," she said earnestly. "Eric is just a friend whose wife is battling a terminal illness." I was offering him emotional support. As I listened, I found it increasingly difficult to breathe, not just from her tight embrace. There had been noticeable tension in our environment lately. We lacked communication, and physical closeness had become rare. I was so worried about Nita, my love, and I couldn't bring myself to burden you with this. The mere mention of her name disgusted you, so I carried this alone, which led to our distance, she explained, apologizing for being distant. I nodded, somewhat understanding but still drawn to the packed suitcase at the front door. As I eyed it, Shannon gently tilted my head down and kissed me, a long, sincere kiss that met my tear-stained eyes. She explained that the suitcase was packed for Nita. "I went to Nita and Alex's house to gather clothes for her," she said, her voice laced with regret. Shannon expressed sorrow for the misunderstanding, understanding the turmoil I must have gone through since seeing the photo. Holding my hand, she led me upstairs with urgency. There was something important we needed to resolve in the privacy of our bedroom. Once there, we gently undressed, exchanged tender kisses, and shed tears of love. Embracing each other tightly, fervently, and passionately, we made love, reconnecting in a way that felt both healing and reaffirming of our bond. The misunderstanding had created a rift, but in that moment, we were determined to bridge it with understanding and renewed affection. Immersed in the presence of my soulmate, Shannon and I lay in bed, exploring each other's bodies through gentle touches, interspersed with heartfelt conversations. Really? I asked her, to which she replied with affectionate tenderness and playful teasing. Yes, really, really. She continued, confirming she had seen Eric's wife and playfully chided me, did you really think I was cheating on you? She recounted how our friends, Roland and Emily, had initially thought the same. The situation with Eric's wife battling cancer had prompted me to reflect deeply on our own marriage. I confessed to Shannon that I had feared our marriage was over, and she shared her concerns, remarking, I believe one cheater in the family is more than enough. Poor Nita. As our conversation wound down, I realized the full impact of Nita's situation. Surprisingly, she had transformed significantly, a change likely driven by her recent ordeals. Grateful for our support, she expressed immense appreciation for being in our home and constantly praised Shannon for standing by her. Nita apologized to me multiple times, admitting she had misjudged me. Despite the awkward beginnings, she soon started to contribute to the household, helping with cooking and housework as she began to feel better. With the help of a fierce and determined lawyer, Nita gained financial stability and secured an apartment for herself amidst the chaos of her divorce. Even though Shannon and Eric continued to spend time together, having our house to ourselves again felt like a calm, restorative period, almost like a second honeymoon. Witnessing a marriage disintegrate into a destructive mess served as a stark reminder for Shannon and me to cherish and appreciate our own relationship. The house was filled with more smiles, and just 4 months later, we received the heartening news of Eric's wife's recovery. Although Eric remained an eccentric character, I genuinely rejoiced in their positive outcome.